about freedom, and I'm the only one that cares about democracy. Even in Occupy and in the democratization class, I had a class on democracy, and he didn't want any democracy in the classroom. I said, "You're basically the dictator," and he's like, "That's the way I damn well like it too." Right? He uses cuss words like Dick Cheney does. They don't know how to use them that well. So I feel like I'm just repeating myself over and over again. Freedom is good. To do what I want is good. To respect each other is good. Solidarity is good. And there's one professor that had told me, was like, "Oh, you just want people to agree with what you say." Oh, is that my thing? Is freedom and democracy just my thing? Maybe it fucking is. Maybe I'm the only goddamn motherfucking American out here that actually gives a shit about freedom for everybody. And freedom for everybody in a group setting is democracy. So, and that's not just chaos and anarchy. In democratic settings, we all have to talk one at a time. So, there has to be some sort of structure so that way everybody gets a chance to say. The majority get their way, but the minority get their say. That's Robert's Rules of Order. That's democracy 101. If you know shit about democracy. So this final project that I was doing for a classroom management class, I had 6 quotes that I started out with, and basically I just went on, and eventually I just put it all out there. I wrote a 50-page manifesto just about how America is a 3-tiered Prussian industrial educational system. It's all about hierarchy and domination, and it's all to smash people into subservience. So I'm going to give that demonstration now. So I'm just going to read. There's 6 quotes. I start out with 6 quotes. I think the quotes actually by themselves say exactly what it is that I am talking about and what it is that I believe. But there's also a hierarchy, the 3-tiered Prussian industrial system. There's a reason why it's so hierarchical, and there's a reason why they're smashing our students and the young American souls in their lives, right? They're not educating them. What you think by the only person getting the education in the classroom is the one who's speaking. You want an education, then you have a grandfather show you how to raise some tomatoes or some shit, right? You have good conversations. You have dialogue with people. You learn through dialogue. You do what Paulo Freire says, or you go with Sugata Mitra or Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But if you sit in a classroom and you look at a PowerPoint and listen to some asshole just go on and on and on, that is not education. That's just not education, right? So it's you're only going to retain 5% of that, and then the teacher retains 90%. So they retain all that they say, and that's a reason why actually I started doing these YouTube videos, was to get better at public speaking, because they're sitting there trying to make me a slave when I need to be a master, right? They're saying, shut up, do as we say, but eventually I need to get up and start talking, and if I don't have, the confidence, or if I don't have I need a sort of a conceptual philosophical framework from which to leap off of, and I've come across some good writings in the last 2 or 3 years, and I feel like I got it down. I know who I am. I know what I want. So let's begin this before I run out of time. So I'm gonna read off the quotes, and then I'm gonna talk about the 3-tiered system. Okay, so this quote comes from Daniel Greenberg, and he is one of the co-founders of Sudbury Valley School, one of the few democratic schools in America. There's actually a school in Louisville that calls themselves the Sudbury School. They don't give a shit about democracy. The director said no, she didn't want me to be doing free volunteer services down there. She unilaterally made that decision. So she don't even understand democracy, and that's unfortunate, because I had a lot of good ideas that she could have just took off with, right? If it was truly a democracy. But okay. So Daniel Greenberg, he was sitting there talking about there's some schools like Montessori. They'll have like 3 different stations for the children to come into, and the children could choose whatever stations they want to learn, but they got to choose the station. And he was sitting there saying, well, that's actually more patronizing than the schools who say, do as I say. In the traditional schools that are rigid, 90% of the people who go there hate them, and they know the enemy. A school that is allowing you to have a little bit of freedom, seduces you into thinking that the little bit of freedom, when you're actually being manipulated, is the real thing. And then that opens you up to being manipulated all your life. And that's absolutely true. Not only is that a slam on the Sudbury School in Louisville and the Montessori educations and any other schools that allows you to have some freedom, but still they're manipulating you, you're still being manipulated. But the traditional rigid schools, you're being manipulated too. It's all one big fucking manipulation. That's it. So that's bullshit. Do you want to be manipulated for the rest of your life? That's what they're teaching you to be. I was valedictorian in my high school. I did everything that they told me to do, and it did not help me. It only hindered my development. There's Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I've discovered him, and actually that's when I've actually started to get some sort of, I was being told by my parents, being told by the school, being told by my bosses, being told by my peers that, you're supposed to do this and act this way, and that none of that actually mattered. None of that actually panned out. And then once I was in college, I'm like, what the fuck am I supposed to do now? Well, I don't know. You've been telling me what to fucking do the whole time. Now you don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know. So what am I supposed to do now, And it was bullshit. It was really frustrating. So anyways, that's why Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, for the kid, you let them do whatever they want to do until they're 12 years old, and that way they'll know who they are. They'll know what their ambitions, their likes, their dislikes, what they want to get into, what they're curious about, and they'll learn stuff. We're the internet generation. You want to learn something? Get on Wikipedia and do some reading. You'll learn it like that. Watch some YouTube videos. I just learned how to do some HVAC, right? I got my heat on, right? There's no heat here, but I figured it out. And that's what we need. We need to be able to figure out that, we need problem solvers. We need critical thinkers. We need people who speak, have an independent mind. Because when you go out here, people are going to manipulate you all your life. Do you want your students, do you yourself want to be manipulated for the rest of your life? If you don't want to be manipulated, then we need to start experimenting with freedom and democracy. So, pedagogy of the oppressed, Paulo Freire. This is where I sort of got the basic my philosophical framework from which everything I think about. There's the oppressors, there's the oppressed, and they need each other. They have a fear of freedom, so they never escape. But there's revolutionary equalists, and a revolutionary equalist doesn't want to dominate, doesn't want to manipulate and control, and they also don't want to be a slave. They want, you're a person, I'm a person, then let's make that work, right? And I would think in relationships, if you love each other, it would just work. You talk to each other, this is what you're interested in, that's what you're interested in, it just works. So Paulo Freire says, the great humanistic and historical task of the oppressed is to liberate themselves and their oppressors as well. The oppressors who oppress, exploit, and rape by virtue of their power cannot find in this power the strength to liberate either the oppressed or themselves. The only power that springs from the weakness of the oppressed will be sufficiently strong to free both. Love. Any attempt to soften the power of the oppressor in deference to the weakness of the oppressed almost always manifests itself in the form of false generosity. Indeed, the attempt never goes beyond this. So the oppressor will say, hey, I'm doing this, I did this nice thing for you, so therefore I'm allowed to dominate over you. That's just false generosity. Indeed, the attempt never goes beyond this. In order to have the continued opportunity to express their generosity, the oppressors must perpetuate injustice as well. It's like somebody that says, hey, I really like that paper, that report that you did, but I still think you're a jerk. There's a Renee Gibson actually said that about Ronnie Lee Smith. It was like, don't get me wrong, I hate Ronnie Lee Smith, right, her brother. I hate him, but I love him too, so I'm so conflicted. That's an oppressor. So you said an unjust social order is the permanent font of this generosity, which is nourished by death, despair, and poverty. That's why the dispensers of false generosity become desperate at the slightest threat to its source. So if one of the first classes that I had at Spalding University, I said that I questioned authority. Oh my God, you would have thought that, I dropped an A-bomb in the class. No, I didn't drop an A-bomb. I just said I questioned it. So if they're so insecure that if someone just questions their authority, the person who is giving the order saying do this and do that, you got to have reasons for why you're saying do this and do that. And for anybody who doesn't check an authority figure, is like, why are you telling me this? Why do I have to do what you're telling me? They have to legitimate it. If they don't legitimate it, then they're illegitimate power. You don't need to listen to them. They need to fuck off. So that's Paulo Freire. That's just one snippet, but it just kind of shows how insecure the oppressors are. The colonial man will first manifest this aggressiveness, which has been deposited in his bones against his own people. So this is about how hierarchy works. So when I see a classroom, I see very clearly you got massa, the autocratic monarchist, the dictator in the front of the room, and you got the masses. And I remember actually telling a friend that, and he was like, "Oh no, that's stupid." Well, you're fucking ignorant, because that's exactly what it is. They're being taught classroom management tactics, which is to oppress the students. That's the point. Okay, that's the point. So the colonial man, so what I'm going to get to is sort of how the slaves, the students in the classes, treat each other. So whereas the massa sits there and says, whips all the students into place and say, "Do as you're told," and I'm the boss around here. That destroys everything. It destroys their humanity and their curiosity. It destroys that individual, but it also destroys the relationship between the slaves. Because one slave can't really respect another slave. And Fanon says that the reason why they attack each other is to feel human, to feel like human beings. They've been dehumanized by the oppressor, and so therefore they'll attack each other because they can't think to unite and to go after the ones who's oppressing them both. So this is the period. Let's see, he's talking about some in Africa. I don't know. The French were the ones who was oppressing some country in Africa. So this is the period when the niggers beat each other up, and the police and magistrates do not know which way to turn when faced with the astonishing waves of crime in North Africa. The settler keeps alive in the native an anger which he deprives of an outlet. The native is trapped in the tight links of the chains of colonialism. The native's muscular tension finds outlet regularly in bloodthirsty explosions, in tribal warfare, in feuds between septs, and in quarrels between individuals. When the settler, the policeman, has the right the livelong day to strike the native, to insult him, and to make him crawl to him, you'll see the native reaching for his knife at the slightest hostile glance cast on him by another native. So when it comes to the French, who was doing all this horrible shit to all the, the slaves, the niggers, as Frantz Fanon, a black man, is saying, and I don't say that in a racial term, but I say that in a hierarchical term, they will attack each other before they say, "Let's stand together and let's go after them." And that's amazing. So you go back to the plantation massa. You got what, about 5 white people who's controlling just a whole field of black folks. Go to the classrooms. You got one dictator controlling 30 different students. I've even heard some educators say they would rather teach 100 students than just 1 or 2. 1 or 2, you actually got to listen to their feedback and treat them like a person. But if you're just going to oppress people, then, it's easier just to sit there and talk to the entire world and not give a shit what the fuck they think, right? When there's 100 people, it's kind of, you would seem like you're being a jerk, right? If you want to speak up and then someone else speak, there's 100 people. That's just not even a good democratic assembly whatsoever. So that's Frantz Fanon, and it talks about the, like what I was talking about, how the hierarchy destroys relationships. That's also the same thing. I got several examples of that. There's you have Henry Ford. Henry Ford, he made sure the blacks worked in one factory and the whites worked in another factory because he didn't want them to unionize and to say, "Hey, we deserve better conditions." So that's a direct, application of hierarchy destroying relationships, and it just makes sense, right? Just think of the most petty thing, like I saw a teacher recently yell at a student because he didn't bring his pencil. The fact that he even asked you to leave the class, in college you just walk out, get your pencil, come back. But when he did it, he was like, "Would you bring your pencil? Would you just bring your pencil?" And so he's chastising him in front of class after he had already asked for his permission, and then he said, "Yeah, go ahead and go." And so, that's him destroying that person's reputation, right? It's like, oh, he can't bring his pencil, and now everybody's watching him getting, berated in front of, public humiliation in front of everybody. The most powerful, potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And that's Stephen Biko. He was a freedom fighter in South Africa. That's exactly the same thing I'm talking about. So the most powerful, potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. At the mind of the oppressed, they love their master. They love their oppressor. So if they don't understand who they are or have their own sense of self-worth, they will defend the oppressors if they are themselves the oppressor while everybody else is being oppressed. The Stanford prison experiment is a good example for that. You have, a bunch of college students who just made it up, right? There's pretending to be prisoners, pretending to be prison guards. And then within like a couple of days, they had to call the entire experiment off because there was too many people that was experiencing ADHD, right? So there was too many people that was like getting abused and shit. The prison guards were sitting there telling them to do push-ups and to insult each other and just treating them like total crap. And there was one guy that was doing a hunger strike, and he was like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore, because he started to lose who he was, you know. He said, he was like, you know, I'm going to use me because I don't know his name, but he's like, I used to be Jonathan Masters, and then when I started to be oppressed, then I started to lose who I was. And I was just being, you know, just a cog to a machine, just as being, you know, an object to be controlled and to be manipulated. And the oppressors do not love you. They don't care about you. If they feel the need to manipulate you and treat you like an object, there's no way you could say that they love you. But the other slaves was sitting there yelling at that guy who was doing a hunger strike and was like, oh, stop it, knock it off, just do your push-ups like all the rest of us are doing. Also reminds me of, you know, Gomer Pyle, I think Leonard Lawrence in Full Metal Jacket, right? They started to do that to him too. The massa, the drill sergeant, was sitting there saying, he's the reason why you're doing these push-ups that I'm making you do. I'm making you do these push-ups, but I'm blaming it on him, and I want you to properly motivate him. And so they took these towels and they put soap bars in them, and then late one night just start, right, just start beating the fuck out of him. And then eventually, you know, he snaps. And rightfully so. I mean, who can endure that type of oppression? But the point is, why did all the other cadets beat the shit out of him when the drill sergeant was the one that was, you know, oppressing the entire platoon? And the reason why is because the mind of the oppressed wasn't in concert with their own humanity and with their brotherhood of, you know, their fellow soldiers. They only cared about what the massa was telling them. Same thing with, you know, on the slave plantations. Why didn't they rebel? Because you get enough of them that kisses the massa's ass. Like, why do you want me to run? You know, I live so good here, especially the house Negroes. You got the field Negroes, and you got the house Negroes, and that's Malcolm X. Field Negroes, they know it's wretched conditions. Let's get the hell out of here. But the house Negro says, we eat good food, and we sleep in good beds, and we have good clothing. Why would we want to leave, you know? And they don't even actually see themselves as slaves. They see them as part of the family. And that's Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman said she could have rescued so many more people had they knew that they were slaves. But slaves, like antebellum slaves, didn't even know that they were slaves. We got wage slavery today. Wage slave is happening today. That's what we do. I go to McDonald's, I get a job, I rent out my body for so many hours, and then they'll pay me. But I am being a slave. I am a wage slave. And actually, that was a justification for slavery, because you treat something that you own better than something that you rent. So, you know, I'll go to McDonald's, they'll pay me my wage and be like, get the fuck out of here. But with the slave, it's like they had to take care of their whole lives. I'm not justifying slavery. I'm just saying that slavery exists today. So the next one is Frederick Douglass. And I'm going to make this a two-parter because I didn't read my 6 quotes. But this is just, okay, 2 more quotes. So, human nature. This is Frederick Douglass after he just got done kicking Edward Covey's ass. He says, human nature is so constituted that it cannot honor a helpless man. It can pity him, and even this it cannot do for long if the signs of power do not arise. So, for the longest time, you know, somebody is getting abused, and they'll be like, oh, poor person who's being abused, right? Like with the, go with Leonard Lawrence, right? With Gomer Pyle. You could pity him and go along with it, but since nobody was sitting there saying, you know, fuck you, I'm not going to do what the fuck you tell me, right? They didn't go all rage against the machine. No, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't. He didn't say nothing for himself. There was no power, nothing to stand up for himself. In fact, in the very beginning, when he was getting yelled at, he made Leonard Lawrence get on his knees so he could choke him. And he did it, right? So since he didn't show any power for himself, no one gave a damn. But his last greatest hour, you know, was on silver screen, so it wasn't real. But, you know, he'll live forever now. So that's Frederick Douglass. You know, so you can beat up and hurt people until they actually show any powers. You'll never get respect. In fact, they'll probably hate you for it. When he fought Edward Covey, it wasn't just like he showed power and it was all over. He had to keep fighting, and he always had to keep on, you know, watching and paying attention. And eventually, the slave breaker was like, oh, I ain't gonna fuck with that Negro. That motherfucker gonna fight back. I'd rather just pick on these innocent people that don't ever fight back. And then the last one is a Jean-Jacques Rousseau quote, just talking about how poor baby. How can we not? People say, well, if you just give children freedom, they'll just be all chaotic. And it's like, oh, give me a break. I've been in teacher training school for several years now, and if we're sitting there plotting against them with classroom management, assessment, and all these other classes, curriculum, why can't we plot, for them to get democratic structures, to make sure they understand themselves, to make sure that they stand up for themselves, that they're mentally and strong, and that they're part of the decision making, and that their voice actually matters. We could do the exact same thing if we actually gave a damn. It wouldn't be that hard to do. So it's like, the poor baby knowing nothing, is he not at your mercy? Can you not arrange everything in the world which surrounds him? Can you not influence him as you wish? His work, his play, his pleasures, his pains, are not all these in your hands, and without his knowing? Doubtless he ought to do only what he wants, but he ought to do only what you want him to do. He ought not to take a step which you have not foreseen. He ought not to open his mouth without without your knowing what he will say. And that's just saying, that's the Montessori school. So you know that you're going to have children, right? You know that as a student or as a teacher, you're going to have students. And since you know that you're going to have these students, you can sit there and talk about how we're going to, respect one another, and we're going to vote for what it is, how we want to learn the standards, and what it is that we're actually going to do, and have a real democratic culture where we respect one another, each other's independence, each other's freedom, our dignities, and then we'll actually be Americans, right? Americans will start to be Americans again. You want to say democracy is here because we vote? Not Kentucky. Kentucky don't vote. You got turnout rates of 20, 25%, maybe this time because of Mitch McConnell, but just check out like any, midterm election, or check out the primaries. Primaries, I saw 10%. 10% of Kentuckians voted. That's not democracy. We don't have democracy in our schools. We don't have democracy in our workplaces. We don't have democracy in our homes. And we don't have democracy even in our political establishment. Where's the democracy? Am I the only motherfucker out here that gives a shit about freedom and democracy? I know Sudbury schools in Louisville don't give a shit. I know Occupy didn't give a shit about democracy. And we could do so much better. But, I feel like most of us have just been brainwashed by this education system, and we're not good at democracy. So, eventually democracy is we deliberate and we talk, we present our evidence, we say this is what we believe, and then we weigh in on it, right? And we decide for what is best for the group. So that's the 6 quotes, and I'm going to talk about the 3-tiered American education system coming up next.